Welcome to the University of Oregon Summer Academy to Inspire Learning SAIL program as we host our weekly Faculty Live and Learn presentations. I am Laura Fernandez, Executive Director for the SAIL program, which is a pre-college program serving the state of Oregon. We are honored to have with us today Sage Kemmerlin from the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Oregon. And Sage will be giving an overview of what Earth Sciences is and the variety of topics, methods, and types of research that occurs in the field. It will highlight different branches of Earth science and includes videos created by Earth scientists at the University of Oregon. They will show lab tours, talk about how they got into Earth science, and highlight the dynamic nature of Earth science since and how important it is. So today we are very excited to welcome Sage with us. Sage is a graduate student studying explosive volcano super eruptions at the university. She attended Georgia Tech for her undergraduate degree and changed her major several times before finding Earth science. She conducted undergraduate research on volcanic landslides and was fortunate enough to spend 2 weeks collecting data in the field of Costa Rica. Sage then went directly on to graduate school here at the University of Oregon to study the physics of volcanic eruptions using computer models and experiments. I can't wait to hear everything that Sage has to share with us today. I also would like to let you all know, you viewers out there, we are so happy to have you. At any time during this presentation, please put your questions into the chat feature. Sage will be reserving time at the end of the presentation to answer all of your questions. So for now, enjoy, sit back, relax, and we welcome Sage Kemmerlin to the screen. Hi, Sage.
Hello, hi everyone. Let me share my screen real quickly. Oh, what is the awkward part? Okay, that looks good. You can see that. Okay. So yes, I'm Sage Kemmerlin. I'm a graduate student here in my 4th year studying volcanoes. In the intro, I wanted to highlight that I changed my major several times because one of the things that you'll find is really typical in our science is that people don't really come directly into it. It's not a field that a lot of people know about, but it's a really, really cool field because if you're interested in science at all, it incorporates all aspects of all the other types of science. So if you're interested in chemistry or physics or biology, you can also incorporate social science into it, environmental science. There's a lot of different things and techniques, also computer science. It all kind of gets merged into earth science, but we also have really cool other aspects like field work that you can do or different applications for natural hazards. That's very unique. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the field of earth science and, as Laura said, some of the labs and other information about it. So what is earth science? It's the study of the solid earth, including the water, and also the atmosphere. I'm not really going to focus on the atmosphere today because we don't study that here at the University of Oregon, but other institutions do, like my undergrad institution of Georgia Tech did. And so I'm mostly just going to cover all of the different disciplines that we study at the University of Oregon today. And so the first is oceanography and glaciology, which is the study of the ocean and of ice that can be in the mountains or in the ocean or Antarctica, Greenland. Actually, in this picture here, that's one of our faculty members on, I think this is on a trip to Greenland, but he also does stuff in Coos Bay in Oregon. And this is some modeling off of Coos Bay of, I believe, salinity, so salt. Geochemistry, which is the study of the chemical makeup of the earth. So that can be looking at minerals within rocks, but also soils. We actually just had someone graduate, a master's student, who was looking at arsenic intake into rice, and basically how you can use different irrigation techniques to minimize the amount of arsenic that goes into rice. So we have a lot of applications that have a huge impact globally. Structural geology, which is the study of the structure of the earth. So that can be very small scale or large scale. And that can be folds, like if you see here, and I hope you can see my mouse, in the top left, there's folding of that rock. And there's also faulting where they can split. And that's sometimes how you can get earthquakes is through faulting. But basically it's trying to figure out the history of what's happened by looking at the sequences in the rock and how they've changed and been altered. We have geomorphology, which is the study of the Earth's surface and their landforms, basically looking at how landforms evolve over time, how rivers can change the landscape, how landslides occur and how they change the landscape. One of the really big aspects of this that's getting a lot of funding right now is post-fire. So particularly after the summer, right, where we had all of these fires, a lot of our scientists are now going into those burned areas and are doing field work there to look at how that fire is going to change the landscape, how that's going to affect potential landslides, what that means for our environment here. Remote sensing, which is using different remote observations. So that can be on the ground using airplanes or satellites. There's a huge array of data you can collect from this. So GPS, which is probably what you're most familiar with, uses remote sensing, but we can also use GPS to see how a volcano is growing. We can use it to see how after an earthquake, the land has either moved up or down. We can use it to, well, there's just a lot of different techniques for this. There's also a lot of different satellite techniques for looking at how the ground's changed. We can look at how plants are growing. We can look at how ice is melting, how much carbon's being released in different places. So this is a really, really wide field. And it's a really important one because if we can't get somewhere or if we need a lot of data, this is the main field for doing that. And it's a really great way if you wanted to work with like NASA or NOAA someday. They use a lot of remote sensing techniques. And then I'm going to start getting into these video segments from different scientists at the University of Oregon, and they're going to describe their field, how they got into it, maybe some lab tours. So the first is planetary science, and Paul Regensberger will be describing this.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Regensberger, a PhD.
The sound is not clear.
Knowledge. All
It's
these
not
things
clear?
we use to study the
There
Earth.
we go.
Oh, okay. Okay, I don't think he said anything important yet, so I'm just going to keep going.
Apply them to the other planets. How does Earth fit into the puzzle that is the solar system? Seek to understand Earth's place in the solar system, how other planets develop, how they change, how they are similar, how they're different, and even beyond, how do exoplanets, how are different solar systems, how are they the same and different from our own? We can study the nearest neighbors, the inner rocky worlds, Mercury, just blasted by the sun, Venus, so similar to our own, and yet so different, and Mars, thought to host oceans in the distant past. We study the outer planets, the gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn, and the ice giants of Uranus and Neptune. How did these giant worlds change? How did they develop in the first place? Why are they so different from the rocky worlds, the inner solar system? And then there are dozens of moons. Our own moon is not even the biggest moon in the solar system. That belongs to Ganymede, moon of Jupiter. The gas giants have dozens of moons each, so you can understand how they developed and could they host life in our solar system. And this alone isn't even the extent of the solar system. We have comets like Neowise, Pluto, another dwarf planet. We have the asteroid belt, There's so many interesting things in the solar system that are worth studying. People come from various backgrounds. Maybe you come from geology. I came from physics. Or you can come from chemistry, meteorology, mathematics, engineering, and more. Maybe you want to study Venus with its cloudy atmosphere, similar to Earth, and yet shows us a glimpse of what might happen should climate change run unopposed. A runaway greenhouse effect has turned it into a giant heated ball of gas. Maybe you just want to visit the moon, an upcoming Project Artemis to return people to the moon, study impact crater on the moon. Maybe you're interested in how water changes landscapes, like on Mars. Here on the left is Jezero Crater, where we suspect that a river once flew into an ancient ocean. This is going to be the landing spot for the Mars 2020 rover, Perseverance, which is scheduled to launch tomorrow, July 30th at 4:50 a.m. Pacific time. We use various exploration techniques throughout the solar system, rovers like Opportunity here on Mars, and spacecraft like Juno, which orbits Jupiter. Thanks to Juno, we have these fantastic images of these tiny but incredibly large, in reality, storms in the south pole of Jupiter. All these eddies creating this beautiful effect of giant storms. And we're developing new techniques, like the Dragonfly mission to the moon Titan. Titan is a moon of Saturn. Plus, it's a thick atmosphere that is thick enough that we can actually fly a quadcopter around, visit various parts of the planet, explore further and longer than a rover can. Here at the University of Oregon, we have two main areas of study. Magnetospheres, how do up magnetic fields that protect our planet and others? How are they similar? How are they different? And how do they evolve in time? And planetary volcanism. How do different volcanoes on planets act? How are they the same? How are they different? And for a quick tour of some interesting things in the sources in planetary volcanism, we have Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system, almost 3 times as big as Mount Everest, and almost the size of France in terms of land area. It's built on a hotspot, much like the Hawaiian chain. But unlike here where plate tectonics moves the volcano over time, developing a series of volcanoes, the island chain, Olympus Mons is what happens when you don't have plate tectonics. A single volcano builds up and up over and over and over again. Io, a moon of Jupiter, is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. You can see here on the right, captured by New Horizons spacecraft, a giant volcanic eruption on the planetary scale, constantly spewing volcanic material out into this giant umbrella over the surface of the planet. And even more fascinating, you have ice volcanoes on Saturn's moon Enceladus. Enceladus is this icy world, but it possesses an internal ocean that covers the entire planet. And yet at the South Pole, it shoots out water vapor and ice grains to create these ice volcanoes that form the E-ring of Saturn. These worlds throughout the solar system are so unique and so different that it's almost like anything you can imagine could theoretically be out there. And that's what really drew me into planetary science was, what if? How could this planet exist? How about this one? It's always a question of what if. And it's fascinating to explore what can and can't exist out there.
Okay, so the next one is paleontology, and we have Professor Edward Davis giving a couple lab tours. So I'll have 2 videos for this.
Okay, folks, can't see I'm smiling, but I'm here to give you a tour today of some of the paleo spaces. My name is Edward Davis. I'm an associate professor of paleontology here at the University of Oregon, and I'm going to show you some of the things we do for paleontology on campus. All right, so here is the main paleontology research lab. And you can see that right now there's a whole bunch of stuff taken apart because people have been busy kind of clearing stuff out that they needed to bring home for work at home. But it's a paleontology lab, so you never know what kind of cool stuff you're going to see. Like here's a couple of fossil rhinoceros jaws. This is a rhinoceros from Oregon. And I believe this one is from Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. Okay. We have over here a cart full of specimens that were pulled out for one of the last classes we got to teach in person. We got some cool stuff. There's a mammoth tooth. So that's just one tooth from a mammoth. Here's a cast of a jaw from a giant carnivore from ancient Oregon. This is a horse jaw from a fossil horse. This one is from Woodburn, Oregon. Let's see, we've got down here armadillo skeleton, including the outer plates. This is a cast of a giant carnivore from Oregon from many million years ago. This is a molar tooth from a mastodon. So mastodons and mammoths were two different kinds of elephant relatives. You can see that the mastodon has pointy teeth that tended to eat plants from the leaves from trees, whereas the mammoth with its flat tooth tended to eat grasses and had to grind up with these long plates on its flat teeth. So just some kind of crazy things lying around. Fossil storage. These are all fossils collected in Kyrgyzstan by University of Oregon crews. Let's see. Got two computers here where people do paleontology analyses. A lot of paleontology is actually computer time now. We're actually running analyses on the computer to see how things are related to one another evolutionarily, trying to compute things about their shape and how their shapes change through evolutionary time. Let's see, in this room we have a big old stack of reprints. So these are all papers about paleontology that we have here for students to be able to work with. We got some more bones that were left out from a class at the end of the term. These are foot bones from a deer. Here we got some more bones, I believe. This is a horse. This is a femur, so an upper, this is a thigh bone from a horse. This is also from a horse. This is radius and ulna, so this is your elbow right here. And then this is the humerus. So this is actually the upper arm bone from a horse here. Another skeleton. Who are you? This is a tamandua. That's a really interesting kind of insectivore. Similarly, more bones here. Oh, this is cool. This is a foot from a rhinoceros. This is a rhinoceros that died at the Oregon Zoo back in the early 20th century. And these are some of its leg bones. We use these for teaching students about rhinoceros bones because we find a lot of fossil rhinoceroses, as you've already seen. We've got microscopes set up here. So you can see we do a lot of fossil work with tiny little itty bitty microfossils. So you look in these trays here, these are actually full of tiny little rocks and fossils mixed together. We come out of the field like that. And what we have to do is pick them apart under the microscope to figure out which ones are the fossils and set them aside so that we can study them. Here is a little handy guide that we made at one point so you can actually see what the fossils look like as we pull them out of the rocks. And then you can see here, there's a cordless Dremel tool. One of our students, Dana Reuter, she's actually busily doing data collection for her dissertation. So she's actually been coming in a couple of times a week to drill tiny little holes in the teeth of fossils so that she can get data on what the animals were eating when they were alive. You are what you eat. And since the fossils are made up of the things that were alive once, you can figure out what they were eating by studying the isotopes in their teeth. So we have to keep the microscopes covered. Little bits of dust that come from the environment and get on the microscope will actually make them not work properly. Tiny little bits of dust become huge in your microscope view. Okay.
And here's the other one.
Okay, this is the other lab space I wanted to really quickly run through. So this is where we do a lot of our fossil prep work. We got a bunch of really big pieces that need to get made into smaller pieces because there's fossils buried inside of them. We've also got some big pieces that have been fixed up. Talked about fossil rhinos before. Here's another fossil rhino. Turns out there's a lot of fossil rhinos in Oregon that we have to study. Here's another one that's been mostly fixed up. This is a fossil Oreodont from John Day Fossil Beds National Monument. We have probably half the skeleton here. It's a pretty cool specimen. Our preparator, Justice Met, has been working on these things for us. Here's our prep station. So you can see another specimen here she's working on. This is a skull she's cleaning up. We've got a dust collector here. It goes up to a big dust containment system on the wall. It's connected to, we also have some compressed air in here. So what we do is we actually have these tiny little jackhammers. They're tiny little pin-sized jackhammers that we can use to scribe all these little lines on here to carefully remove the matrix from the fossils. That's what we call the rock that surrounds the fossil. So really quickly, I think she left one of them here. Most of them are at home to work right now. So here's one of them, just so you can see. It's a giant, this is the biggest one we've got. Like a great big jackhammer that you use, run some compressed air. We've also got little bitty tiny ones, like this guy. Little bitty itty bitty jackhammer. There's even smaller ones too. Okay. And it's not set up right now, but we also have this guy, which is a miniature sand blaster. It uses baking soda, which is much softer than sand, to help us clean up fossils, but we don't have anything that we need to use it on right now. And then a lot of our fossil work actually uses dental tools, so it's very kind, and we have dentists just donate us the tools that are too dull to use on people, but we can still use them on fossils. Okay, so that was a super quick tour of all the fossil space. We do research and fossil preparation, and I wish I had more time to give to you, but I'm happy to answer questions. So I'm sure you can get in touch with me through SAIL if I'm not able to do a Q&A online with the campus this summer. So.
Okay, so next is my home subdiscipline of volcanology. So you'll see several grad students and I think just one faculty member talking about how they got into volcanology, some of the aspects of research, and some lab tours.
Welcome to the volcanology portion of today's presentation. You'll hear from various UO graduate students and professors to learn more about different ways we can study volcanoes. Volcanic activity can occur in a variety of ways, including lava flows, ash plumes, ground deformation, debris flows, and geothermal features. We study volcanoes in order to better understand and potentially forecast these hazardous structures. While you might think, there are no volcanoes near me, why should I care? The Cascade Range is actually right here in our backyard. There are roughly 2,050 independent quaternary volcanoes in the Cascades. This map shows 13, 7 of which have erupted since the 18th century. Today, you will learn more about the textures of volcanic rocks at Newberry and Medicine Lake, as well as how to understand the history of subglacial volcanoes in the Oregon Cascades, and more.
Hi guys, my name is Amelia and I'm going to be your tour guide through the DUFEC group labs. So our research group primarily focuses on trying to understand the physics behind volcanic and planetary processes, and I'm going to show you a number of ways in which we do that. So let's get started. Welcome to our granular and geophysical flow lab. Often scientists approximate volcanic flows as liquids with no individual rocks or grains, but this ignores a lot of very interesting physics that only exists in a granular or grain-filled system. In this demonstration, we can see some of that interesting behavior. Here we are able to visualize what we call force chains. In granular flows, grains will often not share the weight of the flowing material evenly, but instead form force networks where the majority of the weight is carried by a small subset of grains. These special particles emit light when they are squeezed, so we are able to see these networks of forces. In another experimental setup, we have a rotating drum attached to a high-powered motor and instrumented with force sensors at the bed. Here we can measure forces that granular flows can generate on the land that they flow over. By measuring these forces, we can generate a probability function that should predict what type of forces we might expect given specific flow conditions. Next, we'll check out our sensor development lab. Here we design and build sensors that can withstand extreme volcanic environments for field and large-scale experimental studies. These are a prototype for a smart rock sensor that can measure forces from the perspective of an individual grain. These smart rocks are equipped with a mini computer and are Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled, which would allow us to send data wirelessly. They are able to track their own location through an onboard GPS transceiver and can recharge their own batteries if connected to a solar panel. We were lucky enough to be able to test them out in the USGS debris flow flume not far from the University of Oregon early last summer in this awesome dam breach experiment.
Why, hello there. My name is Kathy Trafton, and I'll be your tour guide for today. In the Physical Volcanology lab at the University of Oregon, we quantify the physical characteristics of tephra, cooled pieces of bubbly magma from explosive volcanic eruptions. These characteristics include size, shape, density, and interconnectivity of the gas bubbles preserved within the rocks. These data are then used in numeric models that predict where tephra will fall during a future eruption, and thus, which places should be evacuated in the event of disaster. One of the physical characteristics we quantify is the size of tephra. To do so, we run samples through a particle size analyzer, which tracks particles as they fall off of a vibrating tray, taking multiple pictures of each particle as they twist and fall in the air. The machine then uses these 2D images to determine the width, length, and thickness of the particles, and thus calculate their volume. Knowing the volume from the particle size analyzer, and that mass divided by volume is density, we can determine how dense our particles are. Where tephra is deposited during a volcanic eruption is largely a function of its size and density. In addition to measuring samples from the field, we can also create idealized tephra using a 3D printer. This allows us to control the shape, size, and connectivity of the gas bubbles of the starting product, and thus see how well our measurement techniques do when we know what the characteristics of the initial rock should be. Of course, we have fun from time to time and print some things that may not always be scientifically necessary, but fun nonetheless. Well, that's our tour today. Thanks for stopping by and hearing about the Physical Volcanology Lab at the University of Oregon.
Our group is really interested in the storage and transport of magma through the Earth's crust. So we're primarily focused on 3 different parts. 1, how does magma in chambers stored in the ground build up pressure to erupt? 2, when the magma chambers rupture, how does that magma actually get transported all the way to the surface? And then 3, when it reaches the surface, how does it sustain a big eruption to grow a large volcano? To study these 3 things, our group uses a combination of computer-based modeling and fieldwork. The computer modeling is important because it allows us to test using physics our hypotheses for how volcanoes work. And the fieldwork is really important as well because it helps to actually make sure that our models are consistent with what the Earth is really doing.
Here is one of the volcanoes that we have here in the Oregon Cascades. This is Hayrick Butte, which is a volcano that we think erupted underneath a glacier. One of the projects that our group is working on is trying to understand what happened when Hayrick Butte erupted and what kind of were the mechanisms that led to Hayrick Butte looking the way that it does. The way that we do that is using 2 main tools. The first of which is collecting rock samples. So we kind of go there, collect rock samples and analyze them in the lab to try and to get a better understanding of what the temperature conditions were like when this volcano erupted. The other thing that we do is use drone surveying to try and essentially access the parts that we can't necessarily walk to. So by using the drone, we can create a 3D map of the volcano to get a better idea of what it looks like.
Hi, my name is Amelia Winner, and I'm a fifth-year PhD student here at the University of Oregon studying granular physics. I'm originally from a small town in southern New Jersey called Millville. I did my bachelor's degree in physics and then realized that there were a lot of really cool physics applications in the earth science field, and then made the switch during my graduate degree.
Hi everyone, my name is Annika Deckert. I grew up on a farm in Wyoming, so I was always outside exploring as a kid. I went to a public high school and was active in sports and community service. After high school, I went to Occidental College in Los Angeles, California, where I studied geology. The program was heavily field-based and gave a great overview of all things geo. Instrumental in my passion for volcanology was time spent in Hawaii, a transfer semester on the Big Island, and a summer of research on Oahu. These experiences have led me to pursue a PhD at the University of Oregon, studying the magma system at the Three Sisters Volcanic Complex.
Hi, my name is Kathy Trafton, and I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate at the University of Oregon, studying physical volcanology. I grew up in rural New Hampshire. My hometown had a population of about 2,000 people, and I spent most of my childhood outside, traipsing through ferns and flipping over rocks looking for crawfish. In elementary school, I'd watch National Geographic specials on my 1-foot box TV in my bedroom. One such special was called Forces of Nature, and it featured such things as tsunamis and tornadoes, but ultimately it was the volcanoes that got me. I saw Katu Kraft, a prolific French volcanologist, go out and navigate effervescing lava flows, and ever since then, I've wanted to be a scientist like her. In middle school and high school, I developed passions for linguistics, mathematics, theater, jazz band, but my chief interest remained volcanology. However, my 400-person high school only had a half semester's worth of an earth science course, so it wasn't until I got to college that I could really immerse myself in geology. I spent my 4 years there, double majoring in French and geology, and was able to ultimately travel to such places as Switzerland, South Africa, Bermuda, and Korea as a result of being a geology major. Learning entailed traveling to the field, and these experiences were often fully funded, which was great for me as a student who was very much in college because of scholarships. I was able to graduate magna cum laude, and came to Oregon to work with Dr. Chomaji Achetti, a French physical volcanologist. I at present study the physical characteristics of volcanic rocks, such as their size, shape, and density, as well as their distribution about the volcano. These data are used in numerical models that predict where these volcanic rocks will fall in the event of an eruption. My career goal is to work with the in the Volcano Disaster Assistance Program for the U.S. Geological Survey. So since 6th grade, I've wanted to be a volcanologist, and from my narrative, it may seem as if the path I took to get here has been rosy and linear, that it all makes sense, but it very much wasn't. I remember failing exams and questioning whether I was smart enough to be a scientist. I remember being told to sit down, that I didn't have a place in science, to be quiet, to study something that will actually make money, to not study so much, to focus on one thing, to not focus on a seemingly niche subject. But I'm fortunate enough to have had the support of others when the road gets rocky. So, to paraphrase a fellow New Hampshireite, take the path less traveled by. That will make all the difference.
Okay, so our last section is about geophysics and seismology, and it'll be presented by Dr. Valerie Sahakian.
Seismology is one branch of earth sciences that is all about the study of earthquakes and related phenomena. This includes using earthquakes to understand the geological composition and structure of the earth. It includes understanding what creates earthquakes. It includes understanding what is the relationship between stress created between tectonic plates and earthquakes. We also study where do we get earthquakes and how frequently. We study how faults, which are where earthquakes occur, behave. And we also try and understand what we need to learn about earthquakes to mitigate the damage and casualties that are caused by shaking. There are two main ways that we study earthquakes. The first is through observations. Usually, this comes in the form of observing the earthquakes themselves. We do this with seismic stations, like this one that's shown here, that's in the Pacific Northwest. These stations are permanent stations, and they're equipped with a solar panel which charges them. And inside is a little box with the seismometer, which is what's actually measuring the motion of the ground. What we get out of this eventually is a seismogram like what you're seeing here. These wiggles are essentially telling you how much and how fast did the ground move up and down when the earthquake happened. With these stations, we can record all types of earthquakes, both big and small, and we can use these to understand the processes of the earthquakes themselves. We can also use earthquakes and fake earthquakes, so to speak, that we make to study Earth structure and get a cross-section of what's going on through the Earth, like what this image shows here. We can do this on land and on sea, where we tow streamers, which are lengths of cable that have little tiny seismometers on them. And we put a little source out that makes a small pressure wave or like a little mini earthquake. We can learn about past earthquakes as well by studying sediments and rocks. This is because sediments essentially act as a tape recorder of what's happened on the Earth's surface's past. We can go out in a ship and collect sediments using cores, like is shown in this video. And we can also go out in the field and measure what we see in an outcrop or on the side of the rock with tools like LiDAR, which is using light. The second big tool that we usually use in seismology to understand earthquakes is modeling. In modeling, we can make what we think possible earthquakes might look like, and given our understanding of the physics of how seismic waves propagate and how earthquakes work, see how well our understanding of this matches what we see in observations. These are some examples of models of fake earthquakes in our own Cascadia subduction zone. That little colored patch is showing you what parts of the fault broke during the earthquake, and all those little arrows and boxes are showing you how the stations on land moved during the earthquake. We use this information not only for understanding more about Earth processes, but also for hazards, like for our early warning systems, as well as understanding how much the ground will shake. There are a lot of different skills that we use in seismology, and three of the big ones are coding, math, and physics. In order to parse out and understand the observations that we see and make the models that we want to make, we need to use computers. We have so much data nowadays that it's impossible to do all of this by hand. This work isn't entirely quantitative. We still need to be able to read and write so that we can understand the work that previous scientists have done and also express our own. And lastly, there's sometimes fieldwork involved, but not necessarily. Some parts of seismology and geophysics can rely entirely on modeling, and other parts require that we go out into the field to collect our data and observations that we need to do our science. I've had a little bit of a winding path to get to where I am to study seismology and geophysics. It wasn't something that I knew I wanted to do right off the bat, and I sort of stumbled upon it by accident. For the most of my life growing up, I really wanted to be a doctor, and in particular, a pediatric neurologist. And I really loved thinking about how the brain worked, but one day I realized that I wasn't sure it was for me, meaning I wasn't sure how well I would handle things emotionally if one of my patients got sick or really didn't do well. And so then in undergrad, I mostly focused on quantitative things, and I always really loved maths and physics, so I ended up majoring in mathematics. And then sort of towards the end, I took a geology course as an elective, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I spent a lot of time talking with the geophysicist in the department at the University of Rhode Island where I was, and then after that, I decided to go to graduate school to study geophysics so that I could pursue it a little further. I went to the Scripps Institution of Oceanography for my PhD, where I studied geophysics, and that's where I discovered seismology. So in particular, I did a lot of work offshore, meaning I went out on ships a lot to study faults that were under the ocean. Since then, I've done work relating to where faults occur, where are our faults, how big of an earthquake do we think they can make, and then after that, I've spent time trying to study how much shaking will actually be created in an earthquake and what kinds of things control that. Not only that, but once we understand that, and once we understand more about what causes shaking and what controls shaking, what can we actually provide to engineers in terms of information so that our structures and our critical facilities are the best designed to withstand shaking in order for us to be a resilient society. One of the things that I think I like the most about geophysics and seismology is that I get to do quantitative work, but I get to apply it to things that I can look at and touch. I do a lot of modeling, I do a lot of computer programming, I do some math, but I also need to think creatively in 3 dimensions. I need to think about how things have evolved over time. Some of the work that I do is more related to basic science questions, meaning the questions about fundamental things that we need to learn about how the Earth works and the processes on its surface. But a lot of it is more applied. And what I mean by that is it's work that is applied directly to a problem that we have as a society, so to speak. And this scratches the itch that I've always had since I was a kid when I wanted to be a doctor about wanting to be able to do something that I feel will be applicable and helpful to other people. So for example, when I'm studying how much shaking might happen in an earthquake and what do we need to understand better so that we can provide more information to engineers, I feel like by doing this, I can really make a difference and help people be more prepared, help our communities bounce back as fast as possible after an earthquake happens. But at the same time, I get to solve puzzles on a pretty much daily basis about cool things that are relating to the Earth and the processes that happen within it as well as on its surface.
So just to sum up, Earth science has quite a lot of variability, as you hopefully have seen now today. There's a lot of different branches within it. There's a lot of possibility for collaboration within Earth science, but also with other departments and other government agencies or private companies. You can do lots of field work, experiments, computer modeling. There's a lot of interacting with the public that you can do. So there's a lot of variability and things that can fit your specific interests. And there's no set background that you have to come into Earth science. We have people who have never had Earth science classes before who come in as grad students. We have people who come into Earth science and they're getting an undergrad degree for the first time and they're in their 40s. We have people straight out of college who know exactly what they want to do. There's so much variability in it, and it's a really open field for just experimenting with lots of different things and learning new stuff, but also applying that knowledge to very real things that you can see, you can touch. It's the planet around us. And also there's a lot of natural hazards applications or just applications to people's daily life. That's really, really cool about this field. So that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions at any time, you can email me. My email is sagek@uoregon.edu. And so with that, I'll stop this and we can go into some questions.
Thank you so much, Sage. That really was a very expansive presentation. I'm so appreciative of sharing all the different aspects of the field that you could squish into an hour presentation. We do have lots of questions in the chat. Would you like for me to read those off to you?
Whatever works best. So.
All right. Well, the first one is, what was it about Earth sciences that got you interested in the first place?
Well, I guess my very first interaction that I remember with Earth science was in 5th grade. And I lived in Colorado until I was about 14, and then I lived in Georgia. And in Colorado, they have Earth science classes once in elementary, once in middle, and once in high school. And so in my elementary school in 5th grade, we were looking at erosion, and we had like a little tray you could put up and you'd watch the water and it create like stream channels. And that was cool, but I wasn't as interested in it. I was mostly just trying to beat all the boys at math because I was good at math, and I didn't like that boys were like, girls can't do math. So that's the kind of person I can be sometimes. But in my 8th grade Earth science class was when I really got interested. Just when we were covering the basic rock types of sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous, I got really, really into that. But I was also really interested at the same time in tornadoes. There was this show called Storm Chasers where people would drive into tornadoes. And at the time I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna drive into tornadoes. But I also liked the rocks, and I was also really interested in space And so going forward into high school, I just really didn't know what I wanted to do. And when I was applying to colleges, I applied to 6 different colleges, with each college being a different intended major I would do. So one was like history, one was international relations, one was aerospace engineering, one was geology, one was art. And then I don't even know how many. Anyways, but I just had a lot of interest. And I went to Georgia Tech, because at this time I was living in Georgia. And in Georgia, they have the Hope and Zell Miller scholarships, where if you have a certain GPA in high school, you can get your tuition mostly paid for by lottery money or by a private scholarship. So I ended up staying in Georgia because it was cheaper. So I went to Georgia Tech for aerospace engineering, because they have a really, really good aerospace engineering program. And in my very first aerospace class, we had to do a project, and we were basically trying to model a lander landing on the surface of Europa. And I was doing the geology part of that, and I was like, this is way cooler than the engineering. So I switched to physics to do astrophysics, which I had done a little bit of in high school. And then was like, I don't want to look at just data that's really far out there from stars. So I switched to earth science for planetary science, and then ended up in volcanology. So it's kind of a bit of a thing of finding my way, but that's how most people find their way into earth science. So.
Wow. Yeah, and a lot of careers actually. So thank you for sharing that journey. Well, that kind of transitions right to the next question about what kind of careers could you get involved in if you were in paleontology?
So for paleontology, and this isn't my specific field, so if you contact Edward Davis, he'll have better information on this. But from my understanding, most of paleontology is going to be in academia, so working for a university, working for a museum, or working for the government. And there's not a lot of paleontology that's going to be private. So if you're working in academia, you're going to be a professor. So you're going to have a lot of professor duties, which is teaching, advising, applying for grants is what I hear takes up the most of the time when you're a professor. They're mostly just trying to get grant money because that's how they get the majority of their funding. And so you'd also be advising students in paleontology while doing some of your own research, but mostly working with your students. If you work for a museum, there are different positions in a museum. There's curatorial positions. There's also lab tech positions where you're doing a lot of just the cleaning of fossils or storage maintenance. And then there's more of the curation where you're figuring out how to put exhibits together. And then there's also researchers who can work in museums. And then for the government side of paleontology, I'm not totally certain.
Well, the next question was, are you able to help actually discover where the fossils are and what the fossils are if you're a paleontologist?
Yes, for sure. So a lot of paleontology can be field work. There's also a lot of the blend between field work and computer work, because there are models that basically model the evolutionary branches. And so you're trying to figure out how all these things relate. But I know at UO, there's a lot of paleontology work where they go near John Day, because there's a lot of fossils out there, but also in Eastern Asia. And I think they have a partnership. I hope so. I think that's what they have. So they do a lot of work out there. So yeah, so a lot of it is being in the field. Edward has this giant mobile rock saw thing that you have to squirt with water so it doesn't catch on fire, that he uses to go and cut through rock and takes it into the field. So there's definitely that, and identifying the fossils. And yeah, if you discover a new one, that's super sweet.
Awesome. Well, there's a new question that just popped up about what can high schoolers do to get involved in the earth sciences field now while they're in high school?
Yeah, so there are different programs. that you'd have to look at. There are private programs, there's programs hosted through universities and government programs, but you can also get involved in university research as a high school student. There's nothing that stops you from doing that. So I did research in astronomy as a high school student. There was a program through the University of Georgia called the Young Docs program. So I spent a month just doing astronomy research. But you don't even have to do through programs. Like if a high school student was to reach out to me about wanting to get involved, like I could easily get them involved in what I do, or if someone else had work. So if you really want to get involved and you're struggling to find programs, just look around at maybe if there's any universities near you, or remotely. There's a lot of remote work too. And you can just contact faculty and grad students. Grad students are more likely to respond quicker than faculty. And there's more projects within the grad student body because there's more of us. So
that's awesome. What about studying volcanology? Is that something you can study as an undergrad, or do you have to only do that in graduate school?
Oh, that's something you can definitely study as an undergrad. In your undergrad, it depends on which institution you go to. They all have different ways of going about the major. So at the University of Oregon, there are 4 different undergrad tracks, and they have specific requirements that you need to graduate, but there's also electives. So generally you'll have just a wide array of classes that you'll take. So just to give you a general sense of earth science. And then there will be specific classes you can take. And the higher up you get in your undergrad, the closer you get to graduation, the higher level of classes you'll take. And that's when you'll get more specific into volcanology or seismology. And then you'll have classes that are actually undergraduate mixed classes. And so those will be the much more specific ones, but there are also intro level classes that cover it. We have one here called Earthquakes and Volcanoes. People like to call it the shake and bake. That's like a more intro level class into volcanoes. And you can do research as an undergrad as well. So.
Wow, awesome. So if a student has said if they are interested in studying earth sciences, it seems like there's a lot of terminology that they'd have to memorize that feels intimidating. Do you have tips for someone who wants to study but is unsure?
Yeah, it does feel intimidating. And I think that's something you're going to find no matter what field you're in, especially if you're talking to people who are experts in it, just because you'll find people have been in it for 20, 25 years and they think the starting level is here when it's actually down here. So they'll use words that you might not understand. And I personally think it's just great to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then they have to explain it better. But if you ever feel like there's terminology that you don't understand, that shouldn't be a bar to you, and you should never feel bad about that, because it's not a reflection on anyone's intelligence. There's just specific words that you will, through the process of your education, learn them. And so there's a lot that I use in my own research. And I remember when I started as a graduate student, I had only been doing volcanology for about a year. And I remember all the papers I was reading about my project kept talking about tuff. And I had literally no clue what tuff was, but that's what my project was about. And so you just learn it as you go, and it feels intimidating, but it's not a reflection on anything. It's just something you'll pick up. And the more you're in it and the more you're surrounded by it, it doesn't end up being like memorization. You just like pick it up because you've heard about it. So I don't know if that made a lot of sense as an answer.
That was a perfect answer. That was great. And you've already alluded to this next question before when you were talking about you and math and boys. But the next question is advice for a girl who's interested in studying this field but feels intimidated that it is overwhelmingly male dominated.
Yeah, so actually what's interesting about earth science is that in academia, out of the natural sciences, so like chemistry and physics and biology, we have the most equal ratio of men to women. There's not as much study about people who are gender nonconforming. But if you're looking more at the gender binary of men and women, it's about, in undergrad, actually more women than men. It's about like 52%, at least in our department here. And then it drops off the higher up you go. It's called the leaky pipeline, and it's something that my department's actively working on. So we actually have a group called Inclusivity and Gender Diversity in Earth and Atmospheric Science, and we're working on those problems within our own department. But part of what we're doing with that is we've hosted a power tools workshop where we brought in some people, and like myself included, I was showing how to use some power tools just to help eliminate some of that. We do field things. So we teach people how to camp, how to use the bathroom outside and feel comfortable about that, how to do that discreetly if that is a safety issue for you, how to eat, how to, take care of yourself in the outdoors, because the like old school geology is definitely that boys club of outdoorsy men who are going to push themselves as far as they can go. And that's changing, but that still is how Earth science is presented generally to most people. And that's not exactly how it is, but there are field components you can do, and we want to eliminate that. There's also lots of computing and math and experiments. But I'd say as a cis woman, so a cisgender woman, I've not found there to be lots of difficulties in this field. I have found sexism with certain people and more issues when I go to conferences with not having people like recognize me. Generally, it's older white men who are the problems in this field. And so a lot of that is doing the groundwork and trying to get your department to do that groundwork. And that's something we're working on right now, is getting everyone involved in making it a better community. And we also are doing like mentoring things. So I have like an undergraduate mentee who I work with, but we also have tutoring because there are barriers in other fields. And as an undergrad, you'll be taking classes in other disciplines in math and chemistry and biology and stuff. So it is something that can be a challenge, but we're working on that. So
it's a great, very, very in-depth answer. Thank you, Sage. We only have a few minutes left and a couple more questions that really talk about kind of what would a typical day in seismology be like? What would a typical day in your job? And what is the hardest part of the job?
Yeah, so a typical day, I think it depends on exactly what you're doing. For seismology, it's mostly going to be coding and working on data input, looking at seismographs, and doing a lot of computer modeling. It depends on what level you're at. As a graduate student, you generally have to do teaching. So some of your schedule will be teaching and grading, while working on your research itself or taking classes if you're earlier on. So it varies as you're going up and getting older in the program. So at the beginning, it's a lot of classes and teaching, and later it's more teaching and just research. So when you're doing research, it depends. If you're an experimentalist, you'll probably be going into the lab most days. Seismology, you're mostly going to be at your computer. There will be probably some field stuff, but generally, if you're doing field things, those field campaigns will happen about once a year, if they do. For seismology, I know they collect large amounts of data in one campaign and then won't go into the field generally for quite a while because they'll have so much data that they've gathered. And so, yeah, and lots of emails. There's always so many emails that you'll have. The hardest part of my job, I think, would be imposter syndrome. That is something that it happens a lot in science, where you feel like you don't belong and that everyone else is better than you. And it's not true, but you're around people who have been in the field for a really long time. And as humans, we compare ourselves to each other. So if you just start out and you're comparing someone to someone who's been there for 7 years, you feel like you've done nothing and you're not good at it and you don't know anything. And it's not true. And you can't compare between anyone's experience because they're really different. But that mental struggle is very persistent. And it's something that we talk about a lot and try to talk about, the mental health in science, because you just end up feeling like you're not as good as everyone else, which is completely false. And you can't compare to anyone else because you're your own scientist with your own projects and your own research and your own drives. So, yeah.
That's a very good life lesson for any field that you're in, and how to navigate life. Very wise. Thank you for sharing that.
My name is Sage.
Well, we are at the end of our time now. This has been a fantastic presentation, really, really expansive. I'm so appreciative. Do you have any last comments, Sage, before we say goodbye for the day?
Just feel free to contact me. Again, my email is sagek@uoregon.edu. If you also look up the Department of Earth Sciences and go to people, I'll be undergraduate students. And if you wanted to get connected with anyone in any specific field, and you feel a little uncomfortable, you can contact me and I can help facilitate that. If you have questions and you want someone who's more of an expert in a different discipline, yeah, just feel free to let me know. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. We very, very much appreciate your time and expertise. So, everyone, have a wonderful day, and we will see you in the new year with more weekly faculty presentations. This is our last one for this 2020 year. So we will see you in this is the last one in 2020. We will see you in 2021 in the new year. Enjoy, happy holidays, and thanks again, Sage. Bye-bye.